I'm extremely excited to introduce you to Sean McComb today. Sean is the Maryland Teacher of the Year, but more importantly, the 2014 National Teacher of the Year. Sean is an English teacher who also teaches college readiness, but he works within his district on the curriculum decisions. Talk about something that requires the importance of leveraging partnerships and finding collaboration across very disparate views from many different players. We're excited to have Sean here. We've seen him speak before, but are really excited about the issue he's chosen on leveraging partnerships. So, with coffee in your hand and a little excitement, please welcome Sean McComb to the stage.
Well, good morning. I am so excited to be here with you this morning. Excited and so thankful to ECS for making sure that teacher voice is a major part of this national forum and for giving me the opportunity to share some teacher voice here with you today. ECS is a special place for me because I think about my first experience here last year, and I was in the middle of this incredible whirlwind of opportunity. I have had an amazing year as a National Teacher of the Year. I've been to China, to Australia, to England, to Anchorage, Orlando, San Diego, Kennebunk, Maine, and everywhere in between to provide some encouragement and be a spokesperson for education, but also to learn from teachers across the country and across the globe. I told my wife just a few weeks ago that I had actually been counting, and I got up to 200 flights I had stepped foot on that year. She said she's been counting too, and I owe her 200 diaper changes. I should probably clarify that we have a baby son. My wife's not in diapers. I hope that doesn't happen for a long, long time. But I had missed some things at home. But it's been worth it for this incredible year that I've had. And I want to share that teacher voice here with you today. Because as I've traveled the country, and especially when I was here at ECS, I was opened up to this world of policy in a way that I hadn't been afforded an opportunity before. In the months leading up to ECS, I found myself meeting with the Secretary of Education and his senior advisors, meeting with the President's advisors on education in the White House. I found myself going to our state capitol and talking with elected representatives and at our State Board of Education. And throughout these conversations, this metaphor kept showing up, this idea of levers. At the White House, we had some state teachers of the year sharing challenges that they saw in their schools. And once in a while, the White House representatives had to say, well, that's just not one of the levers that we can pull to make that change. That's at a state level. They didn't mention that, of course, they have these enormous levers of law and funding that kind of cover a lot of the other levers that didn't come up in the conversation. But when I went to the state level, at the same time, they talked about they have certain levers that they can pull, and the federal government, impinges on some of that and makes some of that possible. At the local level and even in the classroom, we as teachers have certain levers that we have to pull to make things happen as well. And as I listened to some of these challenges, I floated in between levels, listening to this and thinking about the experience in the classroom. And what I've been hearing from teachers, I just settled on this idea, what if we were able to pull levers together? What if we were able to partner and kind of reframe the way that we think about creating policy in a way that was able to align some of these interests to create better policy in the first place? Because I'm not an expert on policy, but my understanding is that it's pretty difficult in order to make it happen and happen well. And I can imagine there's nothing more frustrating to those of you who are policymakers, who have dedicated your lives to public service and taken some of the scrutiny that comes along with that from our brave and courageous anonymous internet commenters, that to do that and go through all that work to make policy and then have it land in the classroom and the schoolhouse where it lives and breathes and find out that there are challenges to implementation at that point. I think if we could get ourselves on the same page and elevate some teacher voice to be part of the process, that we could have some more effective policy and help move the ball forward. The reason that we're all in this room here today, the reason we're all working for better outcomes for children. And the good news is that there are some states that are out ahead of making this happen. There are some pathways to make this change possible. At lunch today, you're going to hear from the state of Kentucky, who've been doing some incredible work over the last 5 years. They've doubled their college readiness rate in 5 years, as measured by ACT scores, in 5 years' time. And the people from Kentucky that I have talked to, what they say is that leveraging teacher voice and working across those levels of implementation is simply how they do business. This quote about working with teacher groups being critical to their success is from Terry Holliday, who has led this work as their state chief in Kentucky. It's simply how they go about their work. In Connecticut, the State Department of Education tapped a teacher to work for them in a hybrid role. So that he spent half his day in the classroom, living and breathing the life of a teacher, and in the second half of his day at the Department of Education, working with policymakers to ensure that the policies that they were creating could live and breathe and work in that classroom space. It was so successful to work with this teacher, they're expanding now to 4 teachers that they'll have on staff this school year in those hybrid roles, sharing time, 1 foot in the classroom, 1 foot in the Department of Education. And there are yet other models. In Michigan and Wisconsin, they have networks of teacher leaders who policymakers can tap when they need insight into making policy. And these teachers stay consistent year over year so they can develop relationships and rapport with policymakers that can lead to more open and honest conversations, can build trust, and better inform policy-making decisions. Some of you might be looking at this and thinking that systemic change on this rate might be something that's hard to get started where you are. But I was in a session with the State Teachers of the Year, who many of whom are here at this conference in this room. And just to hear the idea that a legislator might ask them to gather 5, 10 teachers and come inform before a session, or help give some feedback on a level of policy, we would jump at that opportunity. We would love to have that voice and make that difference because we know that it helps kids. And I have been so impressed with what I've heard from teachers as I've traveled the country this year. So thoughtful, such level of care, so much dedication to the work that they do. The second half of this talk, I want to share with you what they've told me and what I've heard from them. They don't have an opportunity to stand on this stage and to share with you, but I want to be their voice and share what I've heard with you. Yesterday, we talked about making the body politic itch, and this might cause a little bit of itch in the room. But I have to say that I will also provide a pathway for a scratch, a pathway to solution. The spirit of ECS, no problem without some ways to try to find some solutions. But I want to share their voice with you. The first is that teachers want to grow and get better. No one becomes the teacher to become boring Ben Stein, Bueller. No one dreams of becoming that teacher. We don't. We want to improve and get better for kids every single day. I hear a lot about how classrooms haven't changed that much in the last 50 years, or pick your number. And as I think about that, I think about, has the model for teacher growth changed how much in the last 50 years? Right now, in so many places, the model for teacher growth and teacher change looks the same as it has been. A few professional development days scattered throughout the year, and an observation that happens 3 or 4 times a year by a principal who is so overwhelmed with the number of observations and other hats that they have to wear that sometimes the feedback isn't that great, or they don't have that content background, so it's not that pertinent. We take lessons from other countries who are some of the most high-achieving in the world. One of their most sacred practices is treating teachers as professionals with an opportunity to improve their craft, making sure that they carve out time for teachers to observe one another teaching, to plan together, to look at student work together, because seeing it happen with a colleague, working with the same type of students, that creates urgency for change in teacher practice. And allowing the time for it to happen is what makes that possible. We have to value this if we want teachers to change, if we want to improve practice, which teachers want everywhere we go. And there's research that backs this as well. You know, I read a report from the Gates Foundation the other day that said that less than 3 in 10 teachers are highly satisfied with the professional learning opportunities that they have. Less than 3 in 10. And instead of saying, let's have more presentations, more sit and get, or what I like to call spray and pray, that it makes a difference, I think we should look at some of this collaborative modeling. There's a fascinating report from a professor at the University of Pittsburgh named Carrie Liana. It's called The Missing Link in School Reform. And the study looked like this. Looked at 130 elementary schools in New York City. And they wanted to look at 2 factors. Is it about individual capital? Is it about the best and brightest individual teachers as measured by test scores, experience, and credentials? Or is what raises student achievement about social capital? Is it about the frequency with which teachers have conversations about instructional practices? Which has a bigger influence on student achievement? Is it the best and brightest, or is it about getting the best out of every teacher that we already have? And what the research showed was that for every standard deviation that social capital increased in a school building, student achievement went up by 6%. The opportunity to invest in time for teachers to have conversations around instruction and student learning reaps great rewards for us. And I think if we're looking at how to improve the profession, we have to think about teacher growth. What does that model look like? Are we surveying for it in our states? Are we finding bright spots and copying successes? The second area is that we need to talk about how we measure learning and what we use those measurements for. I think about this in a new way with our little guy who I owe a lot of diaper changes to. This is a picture from his 1-year checkup. And when he was 1 year old, I wanted to know where he was at. Had he grown? What does he weigh? Is that good or bad? How is my child doing? I think a lot of parents in this country feel similar about school-aged kids. And I can only imagine if, the pediatrician had broken out some tie-dyed piece of yarn and held it up to him and said, well, he's somewhere between salmon and mauve, which, let me check this chart, is between a whiff and poof and a dinkzuber. And it's like, is this your own measurement? What does that mean? I want percentages. I want to know where he's at. But when she said he's in the 30th percentile, we thought, what does that mean? Where was he before and how has he grown? But also, it meant that she was going to give us some information about how to make sure that we're giving him whole milk every opportunity we have, and we're feeding him the right kind of things. But she didn't say, strap him into the high chair and force feed him, and don't let him go outside and run and play, and don't let him read, and don't give him playtime, and just give him this one thing because that's what we are choosing to measure right now. We looked at multiple measures, and that's what we want. We want holistic looks at children, but we also need time to say, how are they doing and where do they fall? I'm not anti-testing. I think there are reasons that we need to measure it. We need to know that the tests are meant and created to measure the standards and how students are doing to that, which makes us think about what are they not meant to measure. And this is where the rub is for me and many teachers. I know this is a small graph. I'm breaking it, I'm doing all the PowerPoint sins in the world right now. But I just want you to look at two numbers. The top number here, we're looking at teacher-favored ways to improve education from the National Center for Education Information 2011. The number one way, and you can see far and away, teacher-favored ways to improve education, remove incompetent teachers. Teachers love kids. We don't want them to have bad teachers. We don't want that to happen. The question, of course, is how. The second number I wanted you to look at is the bottom number. The bottom number says, evaluate a teacher's effectiveness primarily on student achievement. Why is that so low? Because the ways that we use right now to measure student achievement are incredibly broad. Knowledge and skills on a wide set of inputs over an entire year, year over year, and that is a very broad measure. What does that mean? It means that so many other factors go into that student's achievement, so much that it has to do with home life, the other teachers they have, where they were before. So there are a lot of factors in there. It doesn't mean that it's useless. It tells us where students are. But a study from the American Statistical Association looked at the research and said an individual classroom teacher has between 1% and 14%, according to the studies, on a student's particular test score. And for that reason, the American Statistical Association, the National Academy of Sciences, the Economic Policy Institute, the Educational Testing Service, the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and the American Educational Research Association all say that we should not use those broad test scores for high-stakes personnel decisions for teachers. And I agree with them, but I have to say this. As a teacher, I also agree that student learning matters and outcomes matter. If a student hasn't learned, then we have not taught. But how do we use that for evaluation? And I think the path forward is to look at focused skills in a focused time frame, to use assessments that are instructionally sensitive. If we've identified a teacher through observation who we think is poor, then they should have to have their students take a pretest and a post-test. that is focused on skills that instruction can affect. We don't want these broad measures that allow bad teaching to be hidden by affluence and good teaching to be shrouded by poverty. We need to be more effective and targeted to make sure our students have the best teachers possible. The third area that teachers have shared with me is that we need to have a conversation in this country about childhood poverty. It's a difficult conversation to have. And it's one thing to look at statistics and hear that 1 in every 5 children has food shortage at home. To hear that UNICEF just released a report that says 1 in every 3 children in America is impoverished. It's another thing for that 1 in 5 and 1 in 3 to walk into your classroom every day. It's another thing to look Haley in the eyes as she comes in at lunch in tears because her family lost their home again and she doesn't know where she's going to sleep tonight and she's missing lunch, which might be the last meal of the day for her. And through her tears, she just is so frustrated because she's done everything right and she has worked hard and she's gotten good grades, but her family circumstances are preventing her from the future she wants to have. And of course, poverty is a question that it seems so large for us to do anything about it, but I think there are some paths forward that we can take. As a room full of people who love and care for children, we have to move the conversation away from in-school only reforms to affect achievement. If we want a different outcome at the end of childhood, we have to look at childhood as a whole. And I love cradle to career, but I also think about womb to work and how it starts right there. I think about universal pre-K and that we just need to continue that push for that. I applaud your states that have made the move for that. Think about other promising practices like home visits that need to happen when children are very young. But there is also room for this to happen within our schools and with education policy. When a student comes into our school and they're eligible for free and reduced meals, that should trigger a number of services, screenings from a psychologist, from a social worker, from school counselors. We should be focused on staffing our schools with these kinds of professionals to give kids the services they so desperately need. I look at New York City and the move that they've made to community-based schools for their most needy schools, where these services are housed within the school building. Believe whatever you will and whatever you want about the parents, but when we see the innocent children who have to grow up in these circumstances, not by choice, but by the luck or misluck of their birth, we have to have a heart for them and think about what we can do to change their outcomes. And this is foremost in the minds of teachers. It's not lost on me that these are incredibly difficult challenges that we're facing. But difficulty is the excuse that history and our children will not and should not accept. We have to hold ourselves to do the difficult work, to look at the challenges, because every time we talk about beautiful and wonderful and promising things that can happen with technology and with deeper learning, we have to also look at the challenges that stand between us and making those happen to their full effect. To me, this is the promise of public schools in America. This is why I became a teacher. This is the opportunity to have schools be a vehicle for justice and opportunity and everything that we want America to stand for. It is the collective responsibility of everyone in this room and everyone in this country to provide individual opportunity for children. And some of these outcomes that we wish for and we hope for and we're working for, they might seem audacious and they might seem ambitious, but when we are at our best, that is exactly who we are, that's exactly who we push for, that's exactly what our children deserve, and we get there when we leverage partnership with those in proximity to practice. Thank you so much.